Curious Now with Jenny Rudolph. A social scientist takes on the hidden structures that shape our behavior, communication, culture, and learning. Underneath the surface of intelligent, capable people who care about doing their best are hidden patterns that interfere with how they perform. Hierarchy, ego, communication glitches, resilience, power, professional learning all flow downstream into creating actions that work and actions that don't. Whether trying to figure out a tricky diagnosis, discovering what a learner is thinking, or upping your own clinical mastery, getting curious now is the solution.
What I've heard is things like, I felt betrayed. And I'm thinking to myself, betrayed because they didn't call you at the labs? And the colleague says, yes, I'm shocked myself. It seems like such a strong emotion. Those identity issues wrap up with the feelings, wrap up with the facts, and cause a disproportionate reaction to the event. When I was 21 years old, I had just graduated from college and I was living outside Harvard Square in Central Square with my then girlfriend. And this was my first time living with anybody, learning how to do grocery shopping together and laundry and cooking and everything like that. One day I had proudly and happily done the laundry on a Saturday afternoon when she was out. She came back and she was taking her laundry out of the laundry basket and she looked down at the socks and she was like, "What did you do with the socks?" And I'm thinking to myself, "What do you mean, what did I do with the socks?" She said, "They're all balled up." And I'm thinking to myself, "Yeah, that's what you do with socks." And she said, "No, no, 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 no. I like my socks folded. You fold socks so that you can see them in the drawer." And I said, "Okay, fine." And I said, "You can refold them and, I'll do it next time." So the next time I did laundry, of course, I forgot. And she came home and the socks were balled up in the laundry basket again. And she was so upset. She was like, "I told you I want the socks folded." And I said, "What is the big deal? I forgot. Big deal. It's not folded." And she stormed out of the room and left for a while. Anyway, a couple hours later, we made up and I tried to figure out what was going on with the socks. And, we were only 22 years old, so we didn't necessarily have so much psychological awareness of ourselves yet. And I realized by something she said that it was not about the socks. It was the fact that if I really cared about her, I would listen to how she wanted her socks folded and I would fold them the way she liked. And so it was really a symbol of my caring and consideration and devotion that I would fold the socks right, not really that like it mattered that much how the socks were folded. So, what's significant about this story to me is that it was a signature moment when I realized that somebody's standards about something often come with a cargo of emotions. Like there's a little boxcar going down the tracks of what is the standard for folding socks. And what we're interested in this week is the emotions that get triggered when even a relatively trivial standard is not met. So in week one, we invited you to start remarking and noticing your own judgments through a process of mental noting. In our second episode, we invited you to think about what were the standards that led you to judge or complain. What was the implicit value that you held that led to the judgment? And this week, we're adding another boxcar to this train, which is what are the emotions that go with the judgments and the standards? More than 3 decades of research on the psychology of emotions has taught us this. If you are not aware of your emotions, they have a bigger impact on you. If you suppress your emotions, they often have a bigger impact on your actions and your talking. One of the people who studies this, Lisa Feldman Barrett, has a very interesting way of talking about it, which is if you think about your emotions like a equation that you might use in a statistical analysis, what's the weight that you're giving your emotions in the decision that you make or the action that you take? And what her research has found is that paradoxically, if you're unaware of your emotions, if you can't name your emotions, if your emotions have you instead of you having your emotions, the weight that they have in dictating and directing your actions and responses is higher. So this paradoxical finding leads us to the next step in thinking about becoming aware of our emotions as we try to connect with people, lead effectively, and have conversations that let us understand each other better. In their transformational book, Difficult Conversations, Sheila Heen, Doug Stone, and Bruce Patton talk about the emotions that underlie facts. So in the conversation that I shared last week with the doctor who was working with her resident and had asked her resident to call her if the labs were out of certain kinds of parameters, and the resident didn't call, the facts of that case are the patient's lab values were X. The facts of that case were someone was asked to call, someone didn't call. What Stone, Patton, and Heen talk about in their book, Difficult Conversations, is when we want to talk about that with other people or do something about it ourselves, there are the facts, which is what we consider legitimate to discuss. There are the feelings that go along with those facts. And we don't usually consider those feelings legitimate. And so that's why we suppress them or we don't listen to them and we don't pay attention in a way that lets us name them. But what Stone, Patton, and Heen highlight is those emotions are often extra turbocharged because of a third factor in our difficult conversations, and that is our identity. So if we go back again to the conversation where the doctor asked the resident to call if the labs were too low, too high, outside of a certain parameter, the resident didn't call, you could imagine that the doctor feels upset. In fact, when I've explored this thing in the past with colleagues, what I've heard is things like, I felt betrayed. And I'm thinking to myself, betrayed because they didn't call you with the labs? And the colleague says, yes, I'm shocked myself. It seems like such a strong emotion. And as we dig into it, they realize that they are feeling like they can't depend on their resident. And so their identity as a competent doctor who is responsible for the patient's well-being and or might be worried about themselves being blamed since they were the one on call, those identity issues wrap up with the feelings, wrap up with the facts, and cause a disproportionate reaction to the event. In some 12-step programs, they sometimes say, if it's hysterical, it's historical. So we might be informed by the recent research in trauma-informed care in understanding our over-emotional reactions sometimes. What it's taught us is that if something was humiliating or scary or difficult or uncontrollable or just too much for us, it anchors in us in a way that gets triggered later and seems mysterious. So let's think about the role of emotions in what we've been exploring regarding we have judgments or complaints. They come about because we're holding a standard, and they trigger emotions when those standards are disregarded. What we want to do is increase our flexibility and our compassion for ourselves and other people by making some space and deepening our understanding of those emotions. I'm not speaking about it in a therapeutic sense, but in a sense of evolving my skills to be the best leader I can be. So this week's workout of the week is think of a mistake that someone else made. It should be a small to medium-sized mistake. Let's steer away from something that's very serious error that might have led to patient harm or might have hurt your reputation or been seriously bad for your family, something like that. Also recommend you steer away from mistakes made by your spouse or your child, something a little more neutral, a friend or a colleague. But it should be something that you have some serious heat about. It should have irked you, it should have annoyed you. And what I'd like to invite you to do is pretend that you are talking to a friend in the break room at work, or you're out for a coffee with a friend, and you're venting about this person who made the mistake. And you can just let it all out, like how frustrated you are, how angry you are. Or if you prefer, pretend that you're talking to the person directly and you can just really blast them. It's a simulation. Nobody's going to get hurt. And I recommend you do either one of these exercises by dictating a voice memo on your phone or dictating into a notes app on your phone, or if you prefer, typing. It's the same sort of thing as writing that angry email, but not actually sending it. The purpose here is not so much catharsis as data gathering for yourself. The second part of the exercise is I'd like to invite you to listen to your recording or read your words and try to figure out for yourself, what were you feeling? What did come up for you there? And our goal here is to try to name the emotion, which is not always easy to do. But when we name it, we can tame it to some degree. We have a little more space around it and a little more mastery to allow us to interact with other people from a non-reactive spot. So listen to your emotions, name them, and please feel free to email them to me at curiousnow@harvardmedsim.org, or please post them to our alumni network on LinkedIn. And I'm curious to hear what your experience is with emotions linked to standards. Okay, let me pause. What do you think?
So we always love a lore drop. I'm laughing because in our house we do our own laundry
Uh-huh.
because this is the inevitable result of attempting to do someone else's laundry because laundry stuff is so linked to like childhood. Hey there, it's James again, and we're going to be hearing from a couple of simulation experts who have tried out last week's exercises, how they landed on them. Jenny and I are both really curious to hear from folks. Please feel free to let us know whether it's working for you this way with a follow-up a week later, or whether you'd like to have that earlier, whether you'd like to have it right alongside the exercise as it's given. We're able to do either of those things. There's a natural sequence where they come the week after the exercise. We're also wondering if it might make more sense to pair the two together. So please feel free to contact us either at curiousnow@harvardmedsim.org or on any of the platforms, social media where we put these episodes out. We want to see how these are landing on folks and how they're working, so please feel free to let us know. So without further ado, back to the conversation.
Thank you, ladies. All right. So we're back with Curious Now, and we have our guests, Lori Klenke-Borgman and Colleen Donovan. So today we're going to be building on what we talked about last week, Laura and Colleen, which was we're going to kind of dig into the mystery of what's going on behind the judgment. We talked a bit about Robert Keegan's idea that when you have a complaint or a judgment, it's almost like the other side of the coin is what is your commitment or what is your standard that you care about? And you wouldn't be judging if you didn't have a standard. And so I'm wondering, as you started exploring that, what kinds of things did you discover about your standards?
The standards that my mental noting really brought forth to me were the importance and the value of really clear communication. And the other standard that I think kind of goes hand in hand with the mental noting that I experienced was how important to me, my standard of, in my opinion, following instructions and sort of doing what you say you were going to do. I think those are really two major standards for me.
You may not be quite as judgmental as I am, Laura, because I have to work really hard on resetting myself often. And when I have a standard and someone doesn't meet it, I often think something like, what are they thinking, or what's the matter with them, or WTF. Is there like a story going on in your mind?
The narrative in my brain is always something along the lines of, do they not understand how important clear communication is, or vice versa, right? Do they not understand how far things can get off course, or how big of issues can come from not being really clear and really tight in your communication? I think that's what often bubbles up in my head is, gosh, it just must not be understood of like how important this is to get us where we need to go.
I don't know about you, but I often feel some indignation when people don't
Yeah.
adhere to my
Yes.
extremely excellent standard.
Right.
Yeah. All right.
Yes. Yes.
Colleen, how about you? What was your journey like exploring standards that you might hold, and what else happened?
I was also thinking about this with respect to some of the conversations that I have in the clinical space, about conversations that we would have as emergency medicine professionals and admitting to the in-house professionals. Me on the emergency medicine side, I think this patient needs to be admitted. Other side being like, well, I think this patient can go home. And I have that same reaction, Jenny, where I'm like, don't they understand how sick this person is? I don't think this person could go home. Don't they know the literature? Haven't they read up? Like maybe they haven't. It's not me asking that question from a place of curiosity. It's me asking that question from a place of anger and being frustrated. And that stood out to me a lot.
So one of the things that's interesting about standards, they are a kind of course, this is the reality type feeling, or of course, this is right type feeling. And the feeling of sort of running up against a wall of the other person's behavior that does not conform to your standard, therefore kind of lands as a surprise. When that happened, Laura, when you were noticing people communicating in a fuzzy way or following instructions poorly, what stories did you tell yourself about them?
They must not know how to do it, or they must not know the value of it, or they've never seen it done well, or those types of things are what bubble up. Is that there kind of has to be a good reason for why they would do it this way, but I can't think of any.
So you're coming up with some causal
Yeah.
explanations for
Yeah.
their not adhering to the standard. Let's just wrap this up with, if there was anything different this week in terms of starting to note the standards behind the judgments, what was the value of it for you, or what did it bring up for you that was helpful to you?
I was very aware of those, the second dart. For the example of like talking to my colleagues, like those are my colleagues. I actually know them. Like, why am I thinking such mean thoughts towards them? That was mean. Why did I think that?
So you have a standard about what kind of a person you should be, which is a compassionate, understanding colleague, and you tossed that second dart at yourself when you didn't meet that standard as well. That's interesting. How about you, Laura?
Almost immediately after, I would be like, do they not know? Do they not know how important this is? Then I would immediately second barb myself and be like, I must not be being clear. If people aren't following instructions, I must not be clear about what those instructions are, even though gosh darn, I really thought it was. So then there was like this immediate, like, is there something I'm doing wrong?
Well, I'd like to give you a little more credit. Opening up the idea that maybe I contributed to this situation is a little different than sort of unfairly and harshly judging yourself. I think it's just exactly the sort of direction we do want to go. Like, okay, it could be that they don't have these values, or they don't have the standard. It could be that I didn't explain it well, and it could be something else. Sort of like a differential diagnosis almost of
Right.
why did it all come about.
Jenny, there's also a component of shame where I think it's a very natural reaction to go, something is going wrong. I must have done something wrong. I think that's a very natural reaction to a situation. It can be a frame that we are holding it lightly, that like maybe we contributed to a situation, but it can also be a bit disabling in the sense of
Right.
it's a third thing.
Yeah.
And those are the two places we jump, like they did something wrong or I did something wrong.
And to that point, James, like one of the things I was saying to myself, because I said it to myself a couple of times, was, wow, that was an unworthy thought.
Oh,
Unworthy. Wow. That's a strong
strong.
word.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But again, to me, like I have this little feeling of pride and compassion in my heart for you when you say that, Colleen, because I'm like, look at the beautiful high standards she has for how she interacts with the other colleagues. I mean, yes, that was a bit of a harsh judgment. And yes, it's maybe a propellant to help you be the person you want to be.